It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to look at boxing as our primary topic. We're going to discuss last weekend's fights. We're going to take a look at the full weekend that Nico Ali-Walsh had. We're going to talk about the Zuffa Boxing card. We're going to weigh in on answers that Dana White gave during the post-event press conference. And we're even going to discuss Saudi Arabia's burning empire. But before we do all of those things, I would like to extend an invitation to you to pick up a paid subscription, because OG listeners know that all of our episodes are split in half. You get to listen to the first half free, but the last half is behind a paywall. But good news for you, we're on the lower end of subscription costs. We only charge $5 a month. We're very, very affordable. And it helps you get access to that paywalled content, and it helps us keep the lights on around here. And we would also like to extend our appreciation to all of our listeners and ask also one more favor, that you share our shows around on social media, because that also helps us tremendously. Now, John, how the hell are you?
Well, I'm holding in there, holding it together. Still got a terrible cough, but I think maybe I can get through the show without coughing too bad.
For those wondering why we didn't put a second show out last week, John's been sick. He's been down with bronchitis really bad. So that's what he's referencing there. So fingers crossed we get through before John has a violent outburst of coughing.
And that was all my fault. I even have we were supposed to record an episode. I couldn't do it because I was coughing so bad. And then I was going to record just a bonus episode, which I almost finished, but I coughed so bad during it, I didn't get that done. So it's all my fault. But let's see if I can hold it together here.
It's not his fault. I blame the whatever bug infected his lungs. That's who's at fault here. Now, as you all know, my first question is always the same. Are there any new filings or updates to the UFC antitrust cases?
Yes, there is. We are not fileless today. We have something. A few filings. I'll go over them really quickly. There were in the Lee v. Zuffa case. Well, actually, it's all of them. It's Lee v. Zuffa, Serkinov v. Zuffa, Davis v. Zuffa. I shouldn't say Lee. My mistake there. I should admit Johnson v. Zuffa cases. The Serkinov v. Zuffa and the Davis v. Zuffa. The first one was a TKO response to the plaintiff's statement of material missing from the defendant's production. That was filed last week on July 24th, 2026. And this is the defendant's rebuttal to that previous document we discussed, with the plaintiff's claim that discovery production was incomplete. In this, they argue that the defendants already produced extensive financial materials. They talk about they produced, I guess, Moody's credit opinions, credit facility documents, internal deliberations. The defendants, of course, being Zuffa, the UFC, they claim they also produced substantial records on competitor promoters, including One Championship, Bellator, PFL, Rizin, M1 Global, and Invicta, including competitive analysis and fighter departure signing communications. The plaintiffs opposed additional search terms are overboard, according to the defendants, and they estimated 4.7 million additional documents requiring hundreds of reviewers for 180 days, at a cost of roughly, here's the number, $17.9 million to do that. And then they had included a supportive declaration of C. Wiggins, an attorney, detailing specific document production, including fighter paid data, budgets, media rights agreements with ESPN and Deloitte auditing work papers. And then they also included a really long exhibit although most of it was redacted, listing fighter bout records, and that was filed under seal. And that supposedly also included some of the contractual information for those fighters. So that's what the defendants filed in response to plaintiffs. Now, Zuffa and TKO also filed a motion to seal, which we just discussed the parts they sealed. So that was another document they filed. And then there was a court order was also issued, a 19-page court order ruling on various sealing requirements tied to earlier statements. And this is from Wexler, Magistrate Wexler, and the court is working through exhibit by exhibit sealing disputes. So they allow redactions of phone numbers, devices, serial numbers, things to protect personal identity, but they're trying to deny full sealing where the underlying content isn't sufficiently sensitive. They grant full sealing for exhibits with general financial business strategy content, and then. So that's the Wexler thing. Now, they also issued an order, came out today, a minute order. The minute order is for the Serkinov v. Zuffa case specifically. The order issued by Judge Brenda Wexler on July 27, 2026. So I guess it actually came out yesterday, but I saw it today. It's a procedural reminder schedule order addressing pending motions to seal. So it's telling the parties that by July 31st, 2026, the parties must file a joint notice identifying which of the pending motions to seal are unopposed. By August 10, 2026, any opposition to a pending motion to seal must be filed. No replies must be filed without leave of court. The joint notice must be identified corresponding motions filed in related cases. And the court points to the parties back to its earlier omnibus sealing order as controlling reference. So in short, this is just a court management order tightening up the sealing dispute processes. The court has already ruled on many of the sealing decisions, motions, but we still have not seen those items that have been sealed, that have been redacted, issued in new documents, new submissions, exhibits submitted. So I'm still waiting for some of the ones that the court has said that should not be sealed, but were previously filed sealed to be unsealed. But we might have to wait. We might have to wait based on what happened in Lee. We might have to wait until finally class certification, until they finally reissue a lot of those documents.
Wow. That's a lot of waiting.
Yeah, a lot of waiting. And so people we will post this in the Substack notes so people can look at these filings themselves, and then they can pick through it and see what I got right and what I got wrong.
All right. Let's move on to our main topic, which is boxing, because boxing had a pretty big week and weekend. We're going to start with Nico Ali-Walsh, because last week we discussed his telephone call with senators and what might have transpired there or come about. It was a lot of speculation from us, but over the weekend he had a meeting with Nick Khan. He even guested on a Zuffa Boxing podcast. Afterward, he praised the positive outcome, but didn't really say what that outcome was. What are we to make of that?
What are we to make of that? I am not quite certain, and that's the question. I have a lot of questions have been raised, not just about that appearance. There was a little photo op where he was there with Nick Khan, right? There was the interview on the Zuffa podcast or Zuffa broadcast you mentioned, where he was talking about, how they're trying to improve the bill, and they've had this discussion with Zuffa, and everybody seems to be getting along. And so you try to read between the tea leaves. I watched an interview, a pretty interesting interview with Amir Abdullah and Nico Ali-Walsh. Amir Abdullah, his manager, with Sean Siddell and Radio Raheem. And they went over this a little bit as well. And it raises more questions. So what do I make of it? So let's go through what possibly be going on here. First of all, it's hard to say exactly what's going on because we are not in the room. I have talked to people now that are involved in the process. I haven't talked to people, and as we've talked before, we have been in some communications with members of Congress about the bill. So I have some inkling sometimes what might be happening. But in this particular case, I am not involved. I play no part. I have no connection to the group that Nico Ali-Walsh assembled to oppose this bill. I know a lot of people are instantly like he sold out. I don't view that. That might be, it's always possible, but that's not where my mind went. I think the possibilities here are, one is this was just, until we see the actual bill that's introduced, this was just it's a big nothing. They made a kind of like an effort to get together to make it look like they're getting along, to appease to their two sides of the Congress. That's one possibility. Now, the more concerning possibilities is that this was a PR attempt or move by Zuffa Boxing, Nick Khan and Zuffa, and I kind of lean towards that because those guys are very good at doing that, right? And I have to assume there's a couple possibilities what might be happening. One is there's very few dates. The schedule makes it very improbable that the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act will get through Congress this year. Doesn't mean it's impossible, and in a second we will get why it's still possible it could get passed. But it's very unlikely because after next week, the Senate goes on their August break. The House goes on the break after this weekend, the Senate next week. So for up until September 11th, the Senate is out of town and no business gets done at the Senate. And so the bill is dead during that period. Then they come back and there's a bunch of must-pass fiscal bills that have to pass. And so they're not going to, I do not think they're going to visit the bill during that period because they have to get those just passed to prevent a government shutdown. And so that'll be the focus of the next few weeks. And then they all take a 5-week break, which is mandated because it's an election year. So everybody goes back to their home state to either campaign or take it easy. If, Ted Cruz is in the middle of a campaign, so he'll be, I shouldn't say Ted Cruz, but Texas is in the middle of a Senate race, so Ted Cruz will probably go back and help out on that front. And so for 5 weeks, it's closed again. Then they come back, and there's two periods, a few weeks each, 2 to 3 weeks each, before Thanksgiving and before Christmas. And then basically everything has to get done then. So almost impossible to introduce the bill, have a markup session, come out of committee, get passed by the full Senate after a debate, go back to both chambers to be reconciled, and then passed as a bill from both chambers to go to President Trump. That's almost impossible. So part of me wonders if TKO has come to the realization that the bill is not going to pass this year, and they are trying to set up that to make it possible they can pass it next year, knowing that the Democrats are probably going to take over the House and possibly the Senate. And if that happens, no longer will they have Trump putting his, because according to Luke Thomas, the Trump administration has put out the word that this is a must-pass priority this year, that he's been putting his thumbs on the scale, prodding this bill forward. That's partly why it seems like it's been moving so fast when they've had chances to move it forward. It's people have been surprised at how much of a priority this bill has been in Congress. But if they don't think they can get it passed this year, they need Democrats next year. Well, then they have to water down the bill a little bit, make it a little more respectable. And one way to do that is bring in Nico Ali-Walsh and the opposition and maybe incorporate some of their demands, which would make might not make a perfect bill, but might make a better bill. It's hard to comment on the bill itself without actually seeing the text. But that sets up next year a possibility that they can get it introduced and passed under a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, which also sounds like it would be a much less, much more watered down, much less TKO centric bill. It wouldn't be as bespoke for TKO as it has been right now. That's one possibility. The other thing that comes to my head is, though, what if they really want it passed this year? And I don't think it's impossible to imagine that one of the benchmarks that they have in their contract with Sella or for Zuffa Boxing is getting this legislation passed. And if getting this legislation passed gives them additional shares, that vesting shares in the company, then I could see them going all out to try to get it passed. But one of the problems is it has to overcome opposition. My concern is that perhaps Nico Ali-Walsh and others are not aware of how impractical it is to pass this bill. And by meeting with Zuffa and giving, and maybe getting some of their demands met, but not aware that this bill probably wouldn't pass. But now that if they're willing to endorse it because it's incorporating their ideas, there's a chance it passes this year. And one way it could pass is, let's say Ted Cruz introduces it next week. They come back in November. They do, because they're not going to do it in September because that's, again, they have a bunch of fiscal bills they have to pass. Come back in November. They pass it out of committee, and then pass it through the full Senate. And instead of sending it back, in fact, they don't even pass the full Senate. Instead of sending it back to the House to reconcile, what they do is they rewrite both bills and submit it into bigger bills, end of the year bills that maybe both sides then just vote on. That's one way to get around that extra step. Now, you couldn't do that in a reconciliation bill because there's nothing financial that doesn't impact the three parts of a reconciliation bill. So you can't do it that way, but they could submit it, perhaps that college sports bill, put it on the bottom of that. Everybody decides to vote for it and get it through. So there is a mechanism, a process that could possibly get it to pass, but you have to have no opposition. And so my concern is, my worry when I see this meeting, the photo op, is that by accepting some of the changes that Amir and Nico Ali-Walsh and others wanted for the bill, and they might be beneficial changes, they might be good changes that have improved the bill compared to the dreadful form it is now. It creates a PR and optics situation where then they can neuter the opposition from any Democrats and get the bill passed. And that's my big concern. And I could see them doing that, because you'd think perhaps Zuffa would be adamant about having the most hardline bill that just basically recreates a UFC model. But if part of their interest is getting greater percentage shares of Zuffa Boxing, then maybe they're willing to take a lesser version of that bill. But that still doesn't mean that lesser version of the bill, a more watered down Zuffa Boxing bill, could not have been better by perhaps killing it this year and starting from scratch next year. So that is when I see that is the thoughts that come to my mind. It's kind of impossible right now to tell exactly what's going on. I'm kind of intrigued what the bill will look like. Is my understanding it'll likely be introduced next week by Ted Cruz. And, when we see it, we will know how much input that Nico Ali-Walsh and the other critics of the bill had in this new version.
Nico also appeared on Ariel Helwani's show and went over some of the items that both sides might have agreed to. What did you make of what his items were?
Well, he also talked about some on Sean Zettel's show. And it's interesting. Now, they didn't give us the full details of what the items are. And I've heard from other people what are some of the proposals, or what some people want to see in the bill. And again, we don't know until we see the final version of the bill, what's in it. But he had 4 points. I should note on the Zettel show, him and his manager, Abdullah, said that there's actually 15 points that they were contesting, but a lot of them were kind of minutia. But there's 4 main ones. And the 4 he brought up were financial transparency. As we know, this is a big talking item. And actually, this is, oddly enough, I think this is kind of the one that's the least important overall. But this is the one that gets the most discussion. This is one that a lot of people think is the most important. And that is the disclosure that's necessary between a promoter and their boxer. As you remember from the hearings in the Senate, Nick Khan, said basically that's impossible and not, worth doing for a major company like TKO. But they want to include that financial transparency that's included. That's right now part of the the current Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act. Then he talked about free agency. Now, he didn't get into details of that. I'm going to go back on that. We'll cover that in a second. He talked about the length of the contracts, which to me goes hand in hand with free agency, and ranking transparency. Now, the ranking transparency one's going to be kind of hard. Again, there is, in the current Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, one of the requirements is that the ABC come up with the criteria for the sanctioning organizations how to rate boxers, and that there's a mechanism to challenge it. So really what they'd be, it sounds like what they're saying is that portion should apply to the UBOs. But the whole point of a UBO is to have your own internal rankings, right? I guess maybe they're going to have, and this is me just taking a guess, maybe they're going to require you to use some outside party, some algorithm or outside party to rank the fighters. But again, the point of the UBO is you're only ranking UBO fighters. So, the ratings, they're not a universal ratings that are open to all promoters, fighters, regardless of promoter or manager. And so that one, it'll be interesting to see what they mean by this. But I also, again, if it's a walled garden either way, I'm not sure what kind of impact that'll have. Now, the free agency one, and the length of contract that go hand in hand. He did mention in both Awani's show and Zettel that they were talking about the length of contracts. Now, I had heard that one possibility that had been discussed is, we talked last week, Ilhan Omar had introduced that 6-year maximum for contracts for UBOs. And I had heard that they'd talked about introducing for the first contract, and a debuting fighter or whatever contract would be 3 years, and then 6 years. And that's better, but I don't know if that's great because, again, 3 years, usually what happens in boxing is boxing promoters, and also I should note, I don't know if this applies just to the UBO or all promoters, what they're talking about. But typically the boxing promoter is you want a long contract in the beginning because you're developing a fighter. You're actually losing money on the beginning fighter because you're developing them into a fighter that can challenge, that rise in the rankings and can challenge for titles. And we have a lot of evidence when you get higher in the rankings and are challenging for titles, contenders or champions, that's when you make more money. So the whole point is to kind of like, I can keep you, spend money developing you, and then I get some sort of payoff at the end. And then you'd want shorter contracts after someone had made it, because at that point they have their most leverage, most ability to earn money. And this kind of flips it and said you have short contracts for guys just starting out, but then you can possibly get them into long contracts after that. I'm not sure that's the best mechanism. It's better than what they have in the current bill, but that does not sound like the best solution overall. But again, we don't know for sure if that's going to be in the bill. I heard some people also are really adamant about keeping the course of contract provision. They want to keep that in the bill. They want to keep that for UBOs. That would be pretty big. But again, you have the problem that UBOs are walled gardens. And so, you have to sign with the UBO in the first place. So then they're allowed to engage in coercive contracts because both fighters are under contract. So that provision, if people are not familiar, in the current Muhammad Ali Boxing Revival Act, there's a provision about coercive contracts. If in order to get a fight with a fighter under if you're a promoter and you have a fighter under contract and another fighter wants to fight them, you can not require them to sign a contract for more than 1 year. And if it's a mandatory bout declared by a sanctioning organization, you cannot ask for any options, any contractual provisions besides that one fight. So that limits your ability to lock people under contract who are the champions, the top of the divisions. They apparently want to introduce that into this bill. Some people are pushing for that. Let's hope it sticks, but it's not going to be nearly as effective because if you have a UBO model, you first have to sign to get in the UBO, and then all your fighters are in that UBO. There's no such thing as a mandatory. There's no such thing as an independent ranking where your fighter wants to challenge the champion of one of the sanctioning organizations. So you don't get set up a situation where we have a coercive contract. Here, it's like you control who fights the champion anyways because they're under your umbrella. And so you can engage in what's called coercive contracts by making them sign longer term, 6 years, apparently, contracts to ever get a chance to fight the title. So it can possibly be defeated by the UBO model. So that's another one it's a thing that would make the bill better. I think the solution, obviously, is that UBO contracts, the entire nature of UBOs is coercive to begin with. So maybe UBO contracts should be very just plain blank, just short contracts. Now, I doubt they'd go for a year, maybe 2 years, but no more than 3 years, let's say, for all UBO contracts. That would be the solution, I think. But I doubt TKO would support the bill. But those are the things he brought up. He did, Amir brought up on the Zettel show, another thing that they want. And this one I really agree with is they need something to put up a firewall between promoters, because managers that have a direct working relationship with the UBO, because it seems right now, as we've discussed in the past with Zuffa Boxing, some of the fighters are acquiring, that there are some management that seem to have they're getting a percentage directly from Zuffa Boxing, and that would be a violation, or at least that's the plan under Zuffa Boxing's UBO model. That would be a violation of the Ali Act, and I think that's something that'd be smart to include some sort of firewall there, because you also don't want them operating like they do in the UFC as brokers, right? So all those are the stuff they're proposing. All of them, again, until we see the actual bill, it's hard to determine, but all of them, I'm already, hearing of these proposals and thinking about, well, if you do not design it specifically to deal with the UBO nature, you're kind of they lose their impact anyways.
How important would it be to have Nico on their side for this quest to amend the Ali Act, push their own version? That's the better term here. Push their own version through. Would this be the final boss, basically?
Well, I mean, Nico Ali-Walsh and Amir both said that they're the B side. I think that's kind of true in this negotiation, but I think this is a major coup if they can get both of them, if they can especially get Nico Ali-Walsh signed on, because they have the widow they have Lonnie Ali, and I think I think people underestimated the impact having Muhammad Ali's grandson there in the Senate opposing the bill, raising these questions. I think they were not ready for the impact that have, because as we discussed earlier, and we've heard from people, and people reported as well, Lonnie Ali had a major, seemed to be very effective when she was in the House. There were people, asking her questions afterwards, wanting to go up and talk to her. But there was a lot of weight behind her as she was, claiming that her husband, deceased husband at this point, would have supported the bill. And now you have a boxer that's the grandson saying the exact opposite. I think that had a major impact on why it was having more trouble in the Senate, or slowed down in the Senate. So having him sign on for it would be a huge win for TKO. And that's why I get a little suspicious about this, because, again, without this endorsement, I am not certain. We went through the calendar. There's not enough days for this normally to pass. The way you would get this to pass right now before the end of the year, the way that I would imagine you'd want to get it to pass is you'd want to get that there's no opposition to the bill anymore, because right now apparently there's some opposition. If they did not endorse it, if they sat back and just said this bill is not good enough, I feel very confident it's not going to pass. But if suddenly this bill's introduced and we see Ali-Walsh and maybe the other people that were with him, the WBC or some of the sanctioning organizations or some other entities endorsing the bill, then the Democrats that are opposing it, or even some Republicans that might have questions, they might drop their opposition. And then you create that pathway where you can quickly get it passed out of the committee. We can then go ahead and reintroduce the bill into separate versions on but larger legislation by the end of the year, and sneak it through that way. We've created an opening to do that, where I don't think that's possible right now. So that is a major get for Zuffa Boxing. And that's why I think people are right to be a little suspicious when they saw Nick Khan sitting there with them, because that felt very like it was a set up photo op, didn't it?
It did.
They maybe want the image out, the appearance, and maybe that's why also they pulled the interview off afterwards, because maybe Ali-Walsh did not say the words that they're hoping he would say in the interview. It didn't come across perfectly because he offered some opposition to Zuffa, but if they have the images out there that they're working together, that maybe that's all they need.
Jay Opate, or is it Jai Opate? I'm always confused on how to say his name. Do you know?
You know what? I'm going to screw that up, because I thought for sure it's Jai Opate, but then I've heard a lot of people say Jay Opate, so I can't remember.
I'm going to go with Jay Opate. In any event, this gentleman is suing the IBF. Why is he suing? What is his complaint?
Oh, he's so little complaining. Just so much complaining in boxing right now. Opate, who's an Australian professional boxer, and he was, I guess, the IBF cruiserweight champion. He's suing the International Boxing Federation, the IBF, which is a New Jersey nonprofit sanctioning organization. It's the only one located in the 48, the continental U.S. The only other U.S. sanctioning organization, the WBO, is located in Puerto Rico. And so, why is he suing them? Well, he claims that he's got a lot of allegations here, so I'll go through them really quick. He signed with Zuffa Boxing in early 2026. The IBF initially agreed to sanction his March title defense against, was it Brandon Glayton, right? And they were going to have, remember, that was the bout, they're going to have Zuffa Boxing's own company belt on the line. And when he did this, the IBF accepted Opate's $73,000 sanctioning fee, which implies he may get paid over $2 million for the fight, just 2 days before the fight. So then, less than 48 hours before the bout, the IBF abruptly withdrew its sanctioning, alleging that the IBF officials felt embarrassed that their belt wasn't given top billing at press conferences, and then claiming, according to Opate for the first time, that the Zuffa belt counted as a rival sanctioning title, triggering an internal unification bout rule. And so Opate, we know, fought. He was formally stripped of his IBF title shortly after, a week or so afterwards. He won the Zuffa title, so he's the first and only Zuffa belt holder. And so what his complaint alleges is that there was actually a coordinated conspiracy amongst the IBF and the other big four sanctioning bodies, which we mentioned, the WBA, WBC, WBO, as well as boxing insiders. And he named people like Daryl Peoples, Mauricio Solomon, Eddie Hearn, and others to punish Opate for signing with Zuffa Boxing.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!